Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and can you believe it's now 30 years since Ford's first world car, the Mondeo, was revealed to the world. Incredible, isn't it? It's also kind of sad and poignant that this year the model line was finally killed off, which is a mistake in my view, but I guess Ford know what they're doing. This though is a Mk1 Ford Mondeo Verona. Let's celebrate what was perhaps the most important car of the 1990s, if not the late 20th century, with a drive in this wonderful time warp 24,000 mile example. And if you like reviews of interesting, unusual, different, rare, weird cars, make sure you hit the like and especially subscribe buttons right now. Now, a word from our sponsor and on with the review. Proudly sponsored by Diamond Bright, keeping the Furious fleet shining. Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, and yes, it is incredibly 30 years now since we first saw this, the Mondeo, Ford's first world car. Well, almost world car, because America didn't quite do it properly, but we'll come back to that in a second. But yeah, here it is, the CDW27, a car that replaced so many models around the world and became ubiquitous with a certain kind of driver. Mondeo man here in the UK was a phrase coined by Tony Blair, meaning the everyman, the guy who goes to work and has 2.4 children. The very annoying phrase hard-working families has replaced it. I preferred Mondeo man, to be perfectly honest. But internally this was called CDW27 because it spanned the C and D segment car sizes. It was a world car, and 27 meant something else. So yeah, CDW27. So this car had to replace multiple other vehicles, the Sierra here in Europe, the Telstar, the Tempest, the Topaz, and be one car for all. So it was designed by a global team of Ford's best engineers and designers, partly based in Dearborn, USA, but the project was headed here in the UK by John Oliver in Dunton in Essex. And because it was a completely ground up project, barely even a nutter of bolt carried over from the previous vehicles, and because it had to fit so many very different markets, it was one of the most expensive car developments in history. $6 billion, that's billion with a B, which puts it right up there with things like the Mercedes S-Class and the W123 as the most expensive cars ever produced. But that paid off. Ford put big money into it and had high hopes for it. But of course it was also a big risk because it was very different from the cars it replaced. Let's take a quick look around the outside and then get it on the road. Now the front of a car is really its face and its personality to quite a large extent. As you walk up to the thing for the first time, you get your first impression of it. And the Mondeo is quite a bit different from its predecessor, the Sierra, in Europe, which was very square and blocky and traditional. This is all new, very 90s, very curvy, very sleek, but slim, tiny little headlights just here, curving into these pointed and tapering indicators on the corner. And quite significantly, we've got no actual radiator grille. We have a radiator opening, we have this central body coloured slat with the badge on it, but no actual radiator grille. As the 1980s into 1990s, the bonnet blending into the bumper without the radiator was becoming quite a popular styling trick. And of course, it does have a completely integrated body coloured bumper as well. I'm referencing the Sierra a lot because that's what I'm used to. It had a square blocky bumper with black plastic bits, even towards the end it had black plastic inserts on the lower models. This is always body coloured right to the top, with a larger air intake hidden in the bottom and an air dam for aerodynamics, because this is great on the aerodynamics. Look how slippery the thing is. Now as we move back down the side of the car, you can't help but notice how sleek and aerodynamic the thing is, first of all, but also the body surfacing, the contouring of these doors, where they go in and out. They undulate out, then in, then out again. If you're familiar with Ford products of the 80s and 90s, the Taurus of the 80s and the Crown Victoria of the 90s follow a very, very similar side profile in terms of the shape down there. Then moving further back, nice big size back doors as well, so easy access into the rear of the car because it is a family car. And then this shape here, it looks almost like it's going to be a saloon, but it's not. Significantly, this is a hatchback. It was available as a saloon, nowhere near as popular, but let's have a look in the boot because that is really impressive. Now, I've long been an advocate of the Mondeo estate as one of the ultimate load luggers. I mean, if you need to move a lot of stuff, but not a lot of money, and in pretty decent comfort, you cannot beat a Mondeo estate. However, the hatchback is not far behind, because underneath this vast glassed clamshell, just look how big this piece of glass is. It is enormous. It was another of the standout features of the car back in 1992-93 when it came out. This boot is absolutely enormous. Now I can tell you how big it is compared to a modern car, because this car had 4 wheels in it this morning. and I transferred them to my fairly new C-Class estate, and you could have put another 2 or 3 in here quite easily. My C-Class is full. This smaller, older car, in real terms, has about 50% more space in the boot. Astonishing. It goes back a long way, it's relatively deep, it pushes right out into the corners as well, so you can fit tons of stuff in here. Under this thick, sound-deadening carpet, it does rather heroically have an actual proper spare wheel, and we have fold-down seats in a 60/40 configuration, and very usefully we have little pulls here on the outside edges, making it very easy to pull them down. And because they kind of thought of everything here, there's even an emergency pull tag, so if your fuel release fails to open for any reason, you can pull this and pop your fuel cap. Even changing the rear light bulbs is easy, because here are flaps, because here are little hatches you can just pop off and get to the back of the tail lights. Now at the front of the car, the bonnet is actually surprisingly short for such a fairly big car. It's like 4.8 metres long, so it's fairly sizable actually. It's actually about the same size as the current generation Focus Estate, so although the cars have got bigger, this was big at the time, but this bonnet is very short. And the reason that is possible is because this is now a front-wheel drive platform with a transversely mounted engine, and it's a new family of engines as well, the ZTECs. This is available with quite a wide range of motors. There's a 1.6, 1.8 and 2 litre ZTEC 16 valves in petrol form, as well as a 2.5 litre petrol ZTEC and a 1.8 litre Enduro diesel for the high mileage motorway muncher who doesn't worry about getting there in a hurry. This platform was apparently designed to have a multitude of transmission and engine configurations, so it has a fairly wide, admittedly space-wasting transmission tunnel, but it was designed to have front, rear or all-wheel drive. But ultimately it was pretty much front-wheel drive only, apart from a 4x4 option which is available during the Mark 1 era. The development of the powertrain was split across Europe and America. The Europeans taking charge of the 4 cylinders and the manual gearboxes because that's what they were good at, and the Americans taking charge of the V6 and slushy automatic. This particular car is a Verona, which is a mid-range kind of LX style trim with a few extras, and it was only available with this, the 1.8 litre ZTEC. Right, let's have a look inside the Mondeo and see this incredible early 90s spectacular of an interior. First of all, the velour. It's velour overload, and check out this pattern as well. This is absolutely fabulous. It's like fallen leaves in autumn turned blue with ice, but soft to touch like velvet. Ah, it's magic. Velour is the best fabric in the world ever. Did I say fabric then? I think I did. Right, let's not get too hung up on the velour because it is just the best. So starting over with the door, because that is a good place to begin. The door card is a really good window into the character of a car. It just shows you the level of care and quality that the designers have put into a vehicle, because in many ways it's the first touch point. We've got a nicely sculpted door card with the armrest built into it, covered in more of this very, very soft velour. Got a really solid door pull. It's plastic of course, but it's Ford and it is the 90s, so everything is going to be, well, fairly plasticky, but in a good way. It's good solid materials. We've got a plastic door handle which also doubles as the lock if you push it in. We've got electric windows in the front. High-spec models had electric windows in the rear as well. We have got an absolutely huge speaker. I think from memory it's a 6x4 oval. Then we have a door pocket. It's not huge, but you know, you get a few bits and pieces in there. Certainly you get your pens and your local area maps in there if you're sales repping in the 90s. Moving into the car, we've got thick rubber door seals, keeping the wind and the noise out, significantly making it a very comfortable, relaxing place to be on journeys. This is easy to overlook and ignore, but it does matter. And just inside of that, we have got a double direction dipper switch for fuel cap and boot lid, and a big tag, easy to find. Everything is easy, accessible and obvious. Really, really good design. Now let's take a quick look at these seats themselves. We've got an extra little cubby down in the seat base, extra space for tic tacs, biros, parking change, car park permits, ID tags, whatever you need to put in there, it's there. It's all manual, and we've got height adjustment as well, which is a nice touch to have. Let's climb inside because it's bitterly cold. And listen to this door shut. That is a whomp, isn't it? Like a really nice, reassuring whomp as it closes. Now, it is a nice big space to be in. It feels open, it feels comfortable, it feels welcoming. I mentioned on the front of the car, it's all of the curves, the 90s organic swoopiness everywhere, and it has continued onto the interior. So at the back of the dashboard, this windscreen base, which has got the blower vents heading up to the glass, is one big curve following the base of the glass, and it continues into another curve which dips down into this trough T-shelf area here, ideal for 4 or 5 smaller cups, and then into another long wide curve here over the top, which carries on into this ovoid trough area here, big enough for a couple of cups of tea to be carried securely in that small tea shelf area. And that curve carries on into this other curve, which is the top of the instrument binnacle. So it's all very long, relaxed curves flowing from one to the next to the next. Lovely, lovely organic 90s design. Those curves and the good ideas don't stop as you come into the dashboard. Our central air vents are here in the center at the top. Now, interestingly, they've positioned the up and down selector knobs in the center, so you can do both up and down at once with one hand if you want to. Also, the weighting of it, it's really, really pleasant. If you get into a Bentley or a Rolls Royce and you've got those big chrome organ knobs, that's the first thing you notice when you touch stuff, is how nicely weighted it is. But here, in this Mondeo, at a fraction of the price of a Bentley, we have this wonderful feeling action. It's just so, so nice to interact with. Richard Parry Jones was the guy in charge of making the car feel as it should on the road and everything you interact with. He was something of a genius when it came to this. Possibly one of the best car engineers to have ever lived. He pushed his teams hard, but he had a focus in mind, and they understood what he wanted, and well, basically he got it, and he got it right. Then we have a small coin holder area next to it. I guess that's for coins, with interestingly stippled rear. Then we can move across to the instruments. It's a really clear, simple layout, just 4 dials. We've got the temperature gauge on the left, the fuel gauge on the right, the rev counter going up to 6,500 RPM, red line 8,000 limit, and then speedometer up to 150 miles an hour, because of course it was shared across all models. Then just a few other warning lights, and although there are no other colours or trim details, the nice beveling, the font, everything looks clear, nice, friendly, welcoming. Everything about this car, even the dials, make you warm to it instantly. Very, very, very clever bit of design and engineering. Moving over to the right hand side, we now also have our other air vent, and you'll notice this is part of one contiguous even piece of plastic, one single moulding going this entire width from here to here, involving all 3 air vents and many buttons. We've got blanking space for one. This car though, as well as having a heated rear window, has quick clear, Ford's patented heated windscreen, which you may or may not be able to see the wires for in the glass. I don't tend to notice it unless the light is very particular on it. This did actually spark a massively heated debate on Twitter for several days the other day, whether people could see the wires or not. Quite interesting. Moving back from that, we have got our indicators and lights on the left, our wipers on the right, which is slightly confusingly push click on and off for the rear wiper. Then we have our steering wheel, which is just a nice size. It's a fairly firm rubber. It's got a little bit of give in it, but not a lot. We have a horn. Ooh, fleet parp. That horn was tooted across many a business car park across the land throughout the 1990s. Now, moving back across next to the quick clear button, we have got a digital clock, easy to set with the hours and minutes buttons there. We've got fairly simple controls for the heating and ventilation. This particular model, the Verona, doesn't have air conditioning. The Mondeo did have aircon across the range. Some had it as standard, not the Verona apparently. But then we have a slightly unusual placement for this, our mirror adjustment, here in the centre next to our heater controls. Really random. Now that's above the radio. The Verona does come with the 2006 RDS key code secured stereo radio cassette. Well, that's a singled-in radio. It sits above a singled-in space because there are loads of other options you could have had, like a CD player, a graphic equalizer, all kinds of stuff that make your, like a home hi-fi stack in your car. This one, not having any of those options, does have space for 4 audio cassettes. It's currently having Spice Girls Spice played in it. This owner has gone all out with the 90s tasticness. We also have a Fat Willie's Surf Shack keyring, peak 90s, alongside the Ford badge. And here in the cubbyhole in the centre, we've got much more peak 90s cool music. We've got Jamiroquai, JK being very big of a petrol head, as we know. Mega Dance, a bit ravey. Another Rave Hits 14, wow. And 3 Lions. That's a bit late 90s, but here we go. So that is in the cubbyhole in the centre. Now, moving down again, we've got a large ashtray, which has got a 12-volt socket, so you can charge your soon-to-be exciting business accessory of a mobile phone in there. Then we have the 5-speed manual gearbox lift for reverse. It's a lovely weighted thing. I'm looking forward to driving this on the road in a moment. Manual handbrake, coin slots, and then this is a big deal was made as other cars had it previously, as I've had pointed out on comments recently. The Mondeo made a big feature of having a pen holder here in the centre, so your travelling businessman can pop a pen out and make a note of a phone number or business deal instantly. Now up above we have got a manual sunroof, big courtesy light, and then in the back we've got a ton of space. Let's have a look. Now big door, so climbing in is easy. Very similar door architecture from the front to the back. Another 6x4 speaker, manual wind windows here, solid plastic door handles and pulls. Climb in and we've got acres more of this lovely velour. These seats are so soft, you just sink into them. Because this car's got the sunroof, it's a little bit tight on the headroom because the whole cassette thing slides back, so it's a little bit lower. We have got a central ashtray. This armrest folds right the way back to make a mini rear tea shelf for 2 cups of tea for rear seat passengers. And we've got matte pockets in the back of these seats. Actually not velour, but like a heavier soft cloth here in the back. One criticism of this Mark 1 version was that it was a bit tight on knee space in the back, so the Mark 2 changed the design of the front seats to address that. We have also got 3 seat belts and we've got an armrest. Very comfy indeed. Right, let's hit the road. Right, let's get this show on the road. Now Richard Parry-Jones was a brilliant chassis engineer, and he had a bit of a phrase he used with his engineering staff that you should be able to tell at low speed within the first 50 metres whether a car is any good or not. And if you're listening to the car and feeling the car, that does hold true. And this is a really good car. Now, development work began on project CDW27 in 1986. And it started with a number of very big meetings from very big wigs at Ford who took the decision that in order to rationalise production around the globe, save money, improve cars, they should have one model that fitted every bill around the planet. And Ford impressively had video conferencing facilities at their major facilities as well. So a lot of these meetings actually happened really in a really advanced manner. So even before the car got off the ground, it was ahead of the game. So after £6 billion worth of investment, the car was revealed in November 1992 and went on sale in March 93. And there was a lot riding on this car because for the last few years before this, Ford, especially in Europe, had been gaining a reputation of being run by accountants rather than engineers. The 1990 Escort and Orion in particular were being slated for build quality, drive quality, all the things that make you want to own and buy a car were starting to be missing from the Ford range. So this car really had to just nail everything down as hard as it possibly could to make it an exciting drive that people wanted to be in. And I'm just going to have to make a right turn just here because there appears to be a guy driving some kind of 1930s or 20s Ford hot rod in front of us. Yes, there is a guy driving a hot rod in 1 degree. That's impressive. It's a 1930 Model A Ford. Now, development of the car was headed up from the UK by a guy called John Oldfield, an English guy who'd been with Ford since the 1950s, and after the success of the Mondeo program, went on to become head of new products and ultimately chairman of Aston Martin. And under him, in charge of developing how the car rode, handled, felt, was Richard Parry-Jones. They put everything into this thing. I don't think it's overstating it to say the Mondeo was as significant in the 90s as the Mini had been back in the 50s. It changed expectations of what a family car should be like. Now, Ford had been benchmarking against the Honda Accord as a best of breed in every area that they had to be achieving better than. But in 1990, 2 years ahead of launch, the Nissan Primera came out and they re-evaluated many of their significant design sign-off points when they realised that the Nissan had improved so many aspects of what the car could be like. So thanks to the Nissan Primera, the Mondeo is an even better car than it would have been otherwise. Now, in terms of being a world car, in many respects it was, because as I said earlier, it replaced so many vehicles around the world, and it was built in Belgium, Germany, Mexico and the USA. And in most countries, it survived the design process pretty much unscathed, apart from America, where it was known as the Contour instead, where initially at first the only external parts that you would recognise from the rest of the planet were the windscreen and the door handles. That was addressed with the Mark II. Now, let's talk about the way the thing drives, because that is so significant. The ride in the car is amazing. It's so planted, so secure. It's not hard. It's not a hard ride like a modern sports saloon. It's a soft yet controlled ride that feels like you can throw it through a corner, stay gripping, but stay comfortable at the same time. The 14-inch wheels with fairly tall rubber tyres do make a difference in that respect. But a lot of the credit has to go to the suspension. It's a McPherson strut, coils and anti-roll bar at the front, and it's a multi-link rear, again with coils at the back. Disc brakes at the front, and surprisingly, drum brakes at the rear. The gear shift is beautifully weighted. This car has only got 24,000 miles on it, so it does kind of feel like it's barely run in. Slides from one gear ratio to the next, a little bit of notchiness in there, but just enough to feel like a good bit of resistance so you know you're doing something. The steering is almost perfectly weighted, and you do get a lot of torque back from the car. You can tell what's happening under all four wheels. Even something as mundane as, well, just a C or D segment family car actually makes every single drive an experience, an event, something not many vehicles can do. That 1.8 Zetec is nicely hushed. It doesn't really feel too stressed. It doesn't feel too ragged. It's got a comfortably nice amount of power to make moving the thing around just effortless. And that Zetec is basically silent at rest. The Zetec engine, this is the 1.8 version, is almost silent at idle, and only really becomes vocal when you're accelerating a little bit harder than usual. Most of the time, it's just almost not there. It's a lovely engine with a really nice torque spread as well, so it's very usable power. It's 114 horsepower and 158 newton meters of torque, which is, for the 90s, a pretty decent amount of oomph, especially from a 1.8. If you think back to the 1970s, 100 horsepower was really going some. Incredibly, they built 1.5 million of these things globally. But when did you last see one on the road? They've all just vanished, like so many of those street furniture cars that were 1 minute absolutely everywhere, and went from being the car your dad had, every company car driver had one on the drive, to being cheap throwaway cars, to being vanished almost overnight, or so it seems. Now, this car was designed and built to a large extent for the fleet market. Now, although there were huge numbers of private sales of them as well, the big money really came from the fleet buyers. There was quite an extensive list of model ranges. There's quite an extensive model range. Starting with base, then the Aspen, which sounds kind of posh, but it's only one up. Then you had the LX and the GLX, the 24 valve, then the SI, which is the sporty one. Finally, if you've got money to burn, the Gear and the Gear X. But if you looked around most business car parks, you were looking at the LX spec, which was the company car favourite because you got a lot of toys for a pretty good price that was very fleet friendly. But to entice private buyers, and maybe to get someone who's had a bonus in that week to get something a little bit posher, there were plenty of special editions. Cars like the Mirage and this, the Verona. Now, like so many families around the country, my dad had one of these as a company car back in the 90s. In fact, I was even able to drive it because at the time his company car insurance allowed the family to have a go in it as well. So I remember plenty of Friday or Saturday evenings where I would borrow the Mondeo and felt like a king of the road because it was just such an amazing driving experience. It looked so good and so fresh and so modern, and it also just handled and drove so well. When I was pretty spoilt and I had a Rover 2000 as my everyday car as a 17-year-old, but this just took all the wonderful things of the P6 and moved it on to, what, 20 years, in fact, literally 20 years. And the owner of this car is in a very similar situation. His dad had a GLX and he hunted high and low to find a good example of one. And buying a Mondeo now, it's very much a case of you buy what you can find. And he found this Verona, which is similar in spec to the GLX, but the main thing, not rusty. And so this has been wax proofed. This has been wax oiled up the wazoo. So hopefully it'll continue not to rust. Well, thank you for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this ride out in this, well, now becoming quite rare and wonderful, once everywhere family car. 1.5 million units produced, only a couple of 100,000 left. But such an amazing thing to hold on to and to preserve. I've enjoyed every minute, and it's taken me down memory lane being in it. So thank you to James, the owner, for letting me take the car out today. And thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed, please hit like and subscribe, and join me again next time driving something completely different.